Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, we are from 10 group and now we are going to discuss about race and ethnicity. So I will explain the definition of race and ethnicity. According to the dictionary by Merriam-Webster, a race is a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical traits. A race is a human population that is believed to be distinct in some way from other humans based on real or imagined physical difference. For example, people may identify their race as Aboriginal, African American or Black, Asian, European American or White, Native American, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, Maori or some other race. Meanwhile, ethnicity is a socially defined category based on common language, religion, nationality, history, or another cultural factor. So, they share a common identity based ancestry, language, or culture. Ethnicity denotes groups such as Irish, Fijian, or Sioux, etc., and then it refers not to physical characteristics but social traits that are shared by a human population. Then the second, defining race and ethnicity. The distinction between race and ethnicity is important because ethnicity can be displayed or hidden depending on individual preference, while racial identities are always on display. In addition, race and ethnicity are social constructions. They are defined and maintained through interaction, reifications, and social construction. And then, the term also do not exist biologically. Then the next is difference between race and ethnicity. The term race has a narrow scope. Meanwhile, in the ethnicity has a broader term than race. Then the race based on similar physical and biological attributes. It means race is usually associated with biology and linked with physical characteristics such as hair texture or skin color and covers a relatively narrow range of options. Then, the people with similar skin color or hair texture can be defined as the same race. Meanwhile, the ethnicity based on culture expression and place of origin. Commonalities such as racial, national, tribal, religious, linguistic, or cultural origin may be used to describe someone's ethnicity. While someone may say their race is black, their ethnicity may be Italian, or someone will say their race is white and their ethnicity is Irish.
Race and ethnicity in Indonesia. The location of Indonesia, which is flanked by the continents of Asia and Australia, affects many things, including race. As is well known, Indonesia is a country with a variety of cultures, ethnicities, language, religions, and races. Each race also has special characteristics that can be seen and identified in general. Then, what are the races in Indonesia? First, Wedge race. The Wedge race has black skin, curly hair, and a medium-sized body. This race comes from southern India. In Indonesia, this race can be found in the Maluku Island, East Nusa Tenggara, and Riau. In addition, this race also inhabits the Jambi, Sia, and Mentawai Island areas. Melanozoid Papuan race. Most of this race live in the Papua. Aru Island, and Mulakai areas. This race has almost the same characteristic as the Negroid race, but with a thicker lip shape. Negroid race. This race has a characteristic black skin, curly hair tends to be curly, and is tall. This race comes from Asia, which can be found on the Malay Peninsula and the Andaman Island. Mongoloid Malay race. This race is divided into two, namely the Puerto-Malay race and the Deutero-Malay race. The Puerto-Malay race consists of the Batak, Toraja, and Dayak tribes. Meanwhile, the Deutero-Malay race consists of the Bugis, Maduris, Javanese, and Balinese tribes. Ethnicity in Indonesia. The Central Statistic Agency has compiled a report on Indonesia ethnic groups, native language, and religions in the 2010 census. These are the six largest ethnic groups that makes up more than two-thirds of 237 million of the country's total population. First, Javanese. Javanese people native to the island of Java is the largest ethnic group in Indonesia with more than 95.2 million people, make up the 40% of the total population. Javanese population spread all over the country, but is highly concentrated in Java and Bali Island. Sundanese. Native to the western part of Java, Sundanese people makes up 16% or 36.7 million people from the country's total population. The ethnic group is predominantly Muslim and stick to their own language. They traditionally inhabit province of Banten, West Java, and Jakarta. Batak. The third largest ethnicity is Batak from North Sumatra with 8.5 million people, accounting for 3.8% of the total population, which consists of Batak Simalungun, Angkola, Karo, Mandailing, Papak Dairi, Tapanuli, Dairi, Toba, and many more. These ethnic groups are distinctly related and speak the same language, while also practicing similar customs. Sulawesi. The fourth largest are the Sulawesi ethnic groups with 7.6 million, equivalent to 3.2% of Indonesia's total population, which comprise of 208 ethnic groups, including Atinggola, Suawa, Mandar, Amatoa, which exclude the people from Makassar, Bugis, Minahasa, and Gorontalo. Maduris, around the 7,179,366 million Maduris made up for 3.3% out of Indonesia's total population, identifying themselves as the people who originally lived in Madura Island. They are predominantly Muslim and commonly affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama, the largest Islamic organization in Indonesia. However, Madurs also inhabit many regions in Indonesia, as most of Madrid's natives have been migrated to any other part of the country for a century. Betawi. The Betawi ethnic group is the term for the people who lived in Batavia, the Dutch name for Jakarta. The native Jakartans made up for 6.8 million or 2.9%. Their language, a Malay-based scroll that borrows extensive words from Hokkien, Chinese, Arabic, Portuguese, and Dutch language, as well as other local language, is still used as main language in Jakarta.
And I'll be explaining about race and ethnicity in America. So, there are racial categories. The 200 census officially recognized six racial categories, including people of two or more races. A, ca- a category called some other race was also used in the census and other surveys, but is not official. In the 2000 census and subsequent Census Bureau surveys, Americans self-described as belonging to these racial groups: white American, Black or African American, Native American, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and two or more races. The first one is White American. White and European Americans are the majority of people living in the United States. White people are defined by the United States Census Bureau as those having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. And then the next one is Black or African Americans. Black and African Americans are citizens and residents of the United States with origins in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the Office of Management and Budget, the grouping includes individuals who self-identify as African American, as well as persons who emigrated from nations. The third one is Asian Americans. So the exclusion laws and policies largely prohibited and curtailed Asian immigration until the 1940s. After the US changed its immigration laws during the 40s to the 60s to make entry easier, a much larger new wave of immigration from Asia began. Today, the largest self-identified Asian American subgroups according to the census data are Chinese Americans, Filipino Americans, Indian Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Korean Americans, and Japanese Americans. The next one is Native Hawaiian. So this group constitutes the smallest minority in the United States. More than half identify as full-blooded, but historically, most Native Hawaiians on the islands chain of Hawaii are believed to have admixture with Asian and European ancestries. The last one is two or more races. Self-identified multiracial Americans numbered 7 million in 2008, or 2.3% of the population. They have identified as any combination of races like white, black or African American, Asian, American Indian, or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, and some other races and ethnicities.
Next is race and ethnicity in Australia. First is the ethnicity groups. Ethnicity groups in Australia is Aboriginal Australian. Aboriginal Australians could be the oldest population of humans living outside of Africa, where one theory says they migrated from about 70,000 years ago. Aboriginal Australians are split into two groups. First, Aboriginal peoples who are related to those who already inhabited Australia when Britain began colonizing the island in 1788. The second is Torres Strait Islander peoples, who descend from residents of the Torres Strait Islands, a group of islands that is part of modern-day Queensland, Australia. Next is racial groups. The first is European Australian. European Australian form the largest group in Australia. In 2016, the population of European Australian are 2,088,867 people. The first records European mariners sailing into Australian waters occurs around 1606 and includes their observations of the land known as Terra Australis Incognita, unknown southern land. There are multiple subgroups of European Australians. The subgroups may be loosely defined due to varied ethnocultural regionalization and definitions for the regions of Europe. Some of these subgroups are: the first, Eastern European Australian, such as Belarusian Australians, Bulgarian Australians, Czech Australians, and etc. The second is Northwestern European Australians, such as Austrian Australians, Belgian Australians, British Australians, etc. The third is Southern European Australians, such as Albanian Australians, Bosnian Australians, Croatian Australians, etc. The second is Asian Australians. Asian Australians is the second largest group in Australia, with Chinese as the largest ethnic population in Australia. Australian Bureau of Statistics, in its Australian Standard Classification of Culture and Ethnic Groups (ASCCEG), has grouped certain ancestries into certain categories, including: the first is East and Southeast Asian, such as Chinese Australians, Korean Australians, Indonesian Australians, etc. And the second is Southern and Central Asian, such as Indian Australians, Pakistani Australians, and Nepalese Australians, etc. The Chinese groups typically working as market gardeners, shopkeepers, or cabinet makers. The third, and it's the last, is Italian Australians. Italian first arrived in Australia as Captain James Cook in 1770, followed by Raffaele Carboni and Eureka Stockade in 1853. Since the arrivals, the Italo-Australian dialect came into note in the 1970s by Italian linguist Tullio De Moore. Italian Australians is the sixth largest ethnic group in Australia, with the 2016 census finding 4.6% of the population. It means 1,013,000 people.
In conclusion, race and ethnicity are used to categorize certain sections of the population. In basic terms, race describes physical traits and ethnicity refers to the culture's identification. Moreover, race may also be identified as something you inherit, while ethnicity is something you learn. Besides that, race and ethnicity in every country is different. That's all for us. Thanks for your attention. Sorry for our mistakes, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.